Crossroads Community Church. We are so glad that you decided to check us out. You are invited to visit us in person at 9 or 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. If you would like to partner with us in our mission to connect others with God, you can visit us on our website at www.crossroads.cc and click on the Online Giving tab. We hope you enjoy this sermon from our most recent service.
Hey guys, how's everybody doing this morning? Good? You guys awake? All right, awesome. Well, we're in the second week of our Not a Fan series. We started off last week, and we started off, I think, with a bang. It was a great weekend for us, and we started talking about the DTR talk. You remember what that is? Defining the relationship. So we all define the relationship that we have with Christ, and are we a fan of His? Are we a follower of His? And that moment when we had that talk, you've probably had that talk with other people in relationship. I think we do all the time, where we get to that place where we say, where's this going? What's this about? Is this for real? And we had those talks last week. Well, we also kicked off our groups this week too. So if you're in one of our groups, how many of you are in one of our groups? Look, that's a whole chunk of you, man. That's exciting. And if you're not in one of our groups, it's not too late. This isn't one of those things where you get started and if you miss the first week, you're out. Like, we want you to be a part of it with us. We have groups that meet all during the week at different times. We have a group that meets on Sunday afternoons at 2. We have groups that meet Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night at 6:30. All of those groups have childcare. And then we have groups that meet... by the way, all those groups meet here. And then we have groups that meet outside of here at different times during the week as well. And we would love for you to be a part of one of those groups with us. It's not too late to do that. So if you have any questions, check with me, check with one of our greeters this morning. We'll get you lined up. Or write on your connection card that you want help finding a group, which is one of the ways that you can communicate with us today. And we'll help you this week find that group. Okay? So I got thinking this week about... we kind of live in a day when we have to qualify for things, don't we? A lot of times you watch the TV and it will say anyone is welcome, or anyone can, bad credit, good credit, doesn't matter, like we can get you a loan, that kind of thing, anybody. But we really live in a day when we have to qualify for things still. Like, you walk into a bank, for example, you've found your dream home and you want to get a loan to buy that dream home. And so they run your credit, right? They check your debt ratio. They look at some other kinds of things too. And then they say, they let you know, hey, you qualified. And you're like, yes, I qualified. Or they say, you didn't qualify, get out. Basically, we don't want to give you money. So we qualify for those things. You qualify for sports teams, for example. You may try out for a team or something if you're younger, and the coach has a little notebook, and they're writing notes and giving you a score and making comments. And then I remember being in high school. You walk over to close to the gym, and they've got it taped up, the cut list taped up on the wall, and you go and look at it, and you look for your name to see if you made the team or not. It's that qualifying type of deal. We qualify for all kinds of things. In fact, here's an interesting one. Did you know you have to qualify to adopt a dog from the SPCA? Yeah, I learned that 2 weeks ago. So my kids were begging me for a puppy, and I kept saying no, but they were, you know how kids are. They just keep asking you, and they push you like one little step farther, and one little step farther, and one little step farther. It's like, Dad, will you at least take us to look at them? Okay, that's where I messed up right there. But you go look at it, and then you're like, yeah, and then you go back home, and you're like, Dad, we want to see it again. Can you take us back tomorrow? And can you at least, the whole time I'm saying, no. Can you at least fill out the paperwork? And talk to the adoption counselor person. I'm like, okay, I'll at least fill out the paperwork. So I sit down and I do all of that, and I fill out those paperwork, and I, get asked all these questions about your current animals and your life, and are you willing to walk the dog, and blah, 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 blah. You go through all this whole list. And she called us, actually, before we even got home and said, Mr. West, we called your vet, and you have a cat that hasn't had heartworm pills in like 5 months. And I said, well, that cat lives outside. We don't really bring that cat in very much. In fact, you go to pick up that cat and bring him to the vet or anything, half the time we can't find her, and then when we do, she doesn't like to get picked up and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, well, sir, do you know what heartworms are? And do you know what they can do to your dog or your cat? And she went through this whole thing with me, and I'm like, you can save the speech. We'll find another dog somewhere else. It was crazy to me. I'm like, stop showing those commercials on TV if you don't want people to go adopt an animal. They got all these animals that need adoption, and we're like a good family. We could take care of a dog, but we got told no. We didn't qualify. Watching the Olympics, you watch people qualify for different things in the Olympics, right? Interesting to me, they go through all these qualifications first, but then they come to wherever the Olympics are, and they have to qualify again to go into, to the opportunity to try out for a medal, And I was just thinking about that and watching people, Billy Crystal said probably the best thing we could do is put an average person in every Olympic game, just for context. And we kind of did that. We watched Usain Bolt run the 100-meter, I don't know what it was, under 10 seconds or right at 10 seconds or something. And just to get an idea of what 100 meters was, we went outside, and our family was like, let's go see what we can do. Let's go try to run 100 meters. And so we went outside and we marked it off. And I thought it might be like the length of this room or something, and I could probably run the length of this room in 10 seconds. But when you actually mark it out, it was way out there. We're like, oh my gosh, look how far you have to run in 10 seconds. So the kids are like, try it, Dad. And I'm like, okay, I'll try it. So we drew a little line on the road, and I see where I have to go, and they're like, ready, set, go. And I'm like running as fast as I can, knowing that Usain Bolt did it in 10 seconds. And I'm running as fast as I can, and the whole time I'm saying to myself, don't decelerate, don't decelerate, don't decelerate, don't decelerate. And I decelerated, and I passed through that line, and it was like between 17 and 18 seconds. Almost twice the time that it took Usain Bolt to run it. And by the way, both my kids beat me too. That was humiliating. But anyway, I'm turning 40 this week, actually. So anyway, and then I got thinking about the long jump. You remember in 1991, Michael Powell jumped. He still holds the world record for the long jump. And I've shared this with you before because it completely amazes me how far that actually is. The world record is 29 feet, 4 1/4 inches. Long jump. So just to kind of get an idea of how far that is, you want me to stop here? Because I can't stop yet. That's how far he jumped. Could you qualify for something like this? I couldn't make that jump in a tornado. I couldn't do it. That is a long jump. And so I know somebody here is saying I could do it, right? So there's always that person in the crowd that's like, I could do it. Yeah, right. Get over yourself. You could never do it. This is a long jump. That is crazy. You think about that kind of stuff, and you see that we live in a world where we have to qualify. That's an incredible athlete that could make a jump like that. None of us could even come close to doing something like that. At least I don't think any of you are Olympic jumpers, We just live in this day when it's like we have to qualify for everything. School, jobs, you get a job description, and they got qualifications on it. You get a phone call, and the person says, you got the job, or they say you didn't qualify, or somebody else was more qualified. We live in a state where everything's qualified. Everything's qualified. And because of that, I think we kind of get a mentality in our mind that maybe when you come into this church today, you have a mentality of I don't qualify. When you hear the invitation of Jesus and he says, that this is for anyone, that he gave his life for the whole world, you think he couldn't have done it for me. I don't qualify. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. I'm disqualified from this thing. And my hope today is to change your mind and to show you that anyone really means anyone. And I want to show you, and we're going to use a verse that you're actually memorizing right now in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. If you're in one of our groups, you're memorizing this. It says, Jesus says, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must, what? Deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. If anyone wishes, I love the beginning of that phrase, if, what's the word there? If anyone, does anyone really mean anyone? When Jesus opens up this invitation to us, does anyone really mean anyone? And again, I think some of us say, anyone can't mean me. It can't mean me. And I want to show you today that it actually does. That when Jesus says anyone, he means anyone. And I want you to write down some notes because I want you to know at the very beginning of this that anyone is welcome. Anyone is welcome. I think sometimes when we hear that Jesus says anyone, we put it in the context of our life and what's going on around us and the world that we live in, and we say, there's got to be some catch. There's got to be some catch. Like it can't really mean anyone. There's got to be some small print somewhere down below that I can't read, but when I read it, I'll find out that I'm not really one of the anyones. Well, the verse tells us at the very beginning of this verse, it's all laid out for us, that it's for anyone. And Jesus really meant anyone. And I'll tell you how I'm going to prove it to you today. Because when you see the people that followed Jesus, you see the people that he opened his invitation to, and I believe that day when people saw the people that were following Jesus and saw the kinds of people that they were and the past, the different pasts that they had, that they were like thinking, no lie, Jesus would let anyone follow him. Anyone follow him. Jesus was a rabbi. I was able to kind of study a little bit of this week. Incredible video that I watched that talked about rabbis. And Jesus was a rabbi, which means that he was a teacher of God's word. And he was a Jewish rabbi. He had Jewish disciples. And so Jewish rabbis really believed, and I do too, that God spoke the first 5 books of the Bible to a man named Moses. He was a historical leader of theirs. And I believe that too. God spoke those words to Moses, and Moses wrote them down. And because of that, they lived their life around those first 5 books of the Bible, known as the Torah, right? The instruction or the way. So because it was the way or the teaching, they believed that's how they were supposed to live their life. And so because of that, their whole lives revolved around these first 5 books of the Bible. The Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They lived their life around that. And that also was because of that, it was their education system. This is what people learned when they went to school. And so people would go to school, children would begin school, boys and girls, Jewish boys and girls would start school at about the age of 6. And the first thing they had to do, because they were learning about the Torah, was to memorize the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And you say, so what's the big deal about that? Okay, that means they memorized that much, word for word. And so as you can imagine, between the ages of 6 and 10, that some kids made it and some kids didn't. You can probably think about your own life and, maybe when you were in school as a young kid, and if you had a challenge like that you had to memorize that much, some of you would say, I could probably do it, and others of you would say, there's no way. There's no way. And so when they would get to that point where they would have to memorize or say the Torah word for word, some kids didn't make it, and so they were told, basically their day in school was done, and they, at the age of 10 or so, they would go out of school and they would learn the trade of their parents. If their father was a fisherman, they learned how to fish. If their dad was a tradesman, they learned how to be a tradesman or a carpenter or a stonemason, whatever the case might be. That's what they learned. And those that were able to memorize the Torah actually went on to the next level of school because they were the best of the best, right? And so then they went to the next level. And the next level was that they had to memorize not just the Torah, but the entire Old Testament. And that happened between the ages of 10 and 14. Now, just for context, let me show you that. That's a lot of memorizing right there. They would memorize the entire thing. And so as you can imagine, some of them made it, and some of them didn't. If they didn't make it, they went out and learned the trade at that point. But if they were the best of the best of the best and they had made it, then the next step, they would go to the next level in their education. The next level of their education was that they would go and speak to a rabbi, and they would begin to put in like an application process for a rabbi. They would say, I want to be one of your disciples, or talmids is what they were called. I want to be one of your disciples or students or talmids. And so they would put in like an application process, and the rabbi, it was very important for them to be thorough because their students were a reflection of who they were and how great of a rabbi they were. And so they would put them through a test, a qualifying test. They'd go through a test of, recite, Numbers 15. And the person would have to recite it. Or how many times is the name Lord written down in the book of Leviticus chapter 15 or something, whatever the case might be. They'd have to talk about those kinds of things. They'd have to give the answers right. And if they were qualified and they passed the test, then they became a student of the particular rabbi. And because of that, they would follow that rabbi wherever they went, because they wanted to learn from the rabbi, and they wanted to be able to know what the rabbi knew, and they wanted to be able to do what the rabbi did. And so they would follow the rabbi very closely. Everywhere they went, they would follow that rabbi. Now, when Jesus, who was also a rabbi, and the best rabbi, when he went out and picked his talmids, or his disciples, or his students, and you look at the mix of people that he picked, people would have looked at them and said, what is this rabbi doing? What in the world what is he doing? I mean, here's this incredible teacher, the smartest rabbi, the one that could answer any question and confuse any person that was trying to stump him, had all of these rabbis that it was like there's talmids. There's two fishermen over there, and there's two political hotheads over there, and there's a tax collector right there. What in the world is Jesus doing, calling all these nobodies to follow him? And it began to what I believe is it began to give people some hope and say, I've been counted out all these years. I've been a nobody in the eyes of this society for all my life. And all of a sudden, there's potential that I may be able to follow one of these rabbis. And I could follow Jesus. Like everyone else has told me no, but here's this guy that's giving me hope, and maybe I can follow him too. And so when Jesus gives this invitation that says anyone, he meant anyone. Let me give you some examples of some of those. So let me say this. And so in Luke chapter 9:23, it says, anyone who wishes to follow me must what? Deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. One of the other cool things so here's these 14 and 15-year-olds following Jesus as a rabbi, or just following rabbis in general. As they would follow, there was this saying that began to develop because they would follow the rabbi so close. I can remember when my son was, maybe my daughter more than my son. My daughter was real clingy to us when she was younger, and so she would follow me wherever I went. If I went, into the living room, here's this little shadow following me wherever I went. You know what I'm talking about? Did you have kids like this? Heather would say, she couldn't even go to the bathroom in private. Like the kids would just be standing there waiting for her to finish. Mom, calling out to her. And they would follow so closely that this saying began to develop, that as the rabbis would walk, they would follow so closely that it said, may you be covered by the dust of your rabbi. Because in other words, you would follow this rabbi so closely that you would go into, you'd walk down these long dusty roads. Wherever the rabbi went, you were following so closely to them that you wanted to see the dust of the rabbi would go on you. Like it would get on your feet, on your legs, on your arms, on your face, because you followed so close to the rabbi. It says, may you be covered by the dust of your rabbi. And so here's Jesus again, at the age of 30, when most rabbis began to teach, going out on the Sea of Galilee, and he sees these two guys fishing, Peter and Andrew. Probably not the way that you've imagined it. Like Jesus didn't have on a bathrobe. I don't know why we think this, but a bathrobe with a beautiful baby blue, pageant sash, and his hair's all blown dry, all pretty, and he's got blue eyes, and looks Swedish or whatever the case might be, and here he is, going out, but that's really not the way that it happened. He goes out to these two fishermen, which, as he's calling out to these fishermen, so I'm trying to show you these examples here. He calls out to these fishermen, and what would we know of these fishermen? That they were nobodies, because they had gone to learn a trade. They had gone to learn so at some point in their schooling, they didn't stack up. They weren't the best of the best. They were the nobodies. They couldn't memorize the Torah, couldn't memorize the Old Testament, couldn't pass the application process for a rabbi or whatever the case might be. And so they just went to fishing. And Jesus goes out and calls them and says, "Follow me, follow me." Then he goes out to two others, the sons of Zebedee, James and John. And they were fishing with their dad, Zebedee. What does that tell us about them? They were learning the trade of their father. They were the nobodies again. They were the not good enoughs. And Jesus is calling out to them. It's so encouraging to me when I read this or think of this, that when Jesus says anyone, that he means anyone is welcome. That anyone is welcome, no matter who you are, rich or poor, woman or man, educated or uneducated, any color, any race, any age, it doesn't matter. In fact, Jesus got angry 2 times, right? You know one. What's the one? When he's in the temple, right? And he overturns, because he sees that these people are being taken advantage of and they're selling in the temple, he flips over. What's the other time that Jesus was angry? Do you know? It was when his disciples were keeping the little children from him. Remember? And he became indignant, the Bible tells us. He became indignant. He said, anybody who keeps these children from me, or anyone who will make one of these children stumble, it'd be better if they had a millstone placed around their neck and they were thrown into the water. And he's indignant. Indignant to me means like that some kind of social injustice is happening. Something's happening here. These children aren't being treated fairly, and he jumps in and he's indignant about it, and he speaks to his disciples. Again, the idea here is that anyone is welcome. Even a child is welcome. People that were overlooked was welcome for Jesus. Anyone was welcome. Let me give you a couple other examples. In John chapter 8, if you've got a Bible, you can follow along with me. I'm going to give you 3 quick examples here. In John chapter 8, we see a woman who's been caught in adultery. It says, at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." So I think they've said this twice now to make sure that you realize that the woman was not just accused of it. She had actually been caught in adultery, maybe in the very act of adultery. It says, in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say? Talking to Jesus. They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis of accusing him. So the woman, although probably she's been her whole life taken advantage of potentially, or treated as a nobody, the Pharisees are treating her, the religious leaders are treating her as a nobody as well, because they brought her out and probably uncovered or barely covered. She's brought out in front of these people to stand there on trial. And they're taking advantage of her in the fact that this is just a trick. This is just a trap for Jesus. It's not even about the woman. They're just trying to trap Jesus at this point. So that's, here's this trap in order to have a basis of accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." You guys are familiar with this. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." So here's this woman who's been caught in the act of adultery. I'd also say the Pharisees made a mistake here as well, because where I come from, it takes two to tango, you know what I mean? And there's no mention of a man, just the woman who's been caught in adultery. And she's brought out in front of everybody, and it's just, how humiliating that would have been to be brought out in front of all these people. And they say, the law of Moses says we should kill this woman, that we should stone her, we should throw rocks at her and kill her. And they said, Jesus, what do you think? Again, it's all a trap. What do you think, Jesus? And Jesus bends down and begins to write in the dirt, in the sand. Wouldn't it be interesting to know what he actually wrote? It doesn't say what he wrote, but some scholars believe that he began to write down the sins of the men that were standing there in front of him. And so he begins to write in the sand, and they begin to disappear one at a time, from the oldest to the youngest, until it's just the two of them there. And Jesus says, where are all your condemners? They're not here. Neither do I condemn you, Jesus says. So here's this woman that was a nobody, that was taken advantage of, that was brought out and used as a trap to trap Jesus. I mean, just didn't even mention the man, just is thrown out here in the middle of this courtyard for everyone to see. And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. But don't miss the last part. He says, but go and leave your life of sin. Go. I don't condemn you. You're forgiven. Go back and live your life with no sin. Don't return to that again. Don't return to that again. So here's a woman caught in adultery, a nobody. The second one I wanted to show you is Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. Again, this is another familiar passage to you. In Luke chapter 19, if you've ever gone to church as a kid, you know this story. Luke chapter 19 says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once, welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. Again, there's this idea of he's a nobody. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. In other words, he's included in this thing. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Zacchaeus was a hated man. He was an outcast. He was what they would consider a pimp, a thief, an embezzler. He would take money from his own people, and he was an employee of the Roman government. So he would take money, taxes from his own people, and he would give it to the Romans. He was hated for that. And not just that, but he would increase the taxes and pocket the extra. So he would meet the quota, and he would keep the rest. And people couldn't stand Zacchaeus. I mean, he was the kind of guy that would take money from a little old lady, and he did. And they couldn't stand him. And he was rich because he was the chief tax collector. So not only did he take a cut, he took a cut from everybody else too, all of the ones that worked for him. He was the chief tax collector. And guess who went to his house to eat food? Although he was rejected and hated by so many people, Jesus goes to his house. Here's this outcast, and Jesus goes to his house. His life is turned around. Salvation comes to his life. He changes his ways. He goes and gives back money that he had taken from people. Like, he gave them back more than he had taken. Zacchaeus was one of those people that would have said, he's outside of the realm of possibility here. How about Levi in Matthew chapter 9? Levi was also a tax collector. Again, people didn't really care for tax collectors back in the day. I'm not sure they do now either, but this is definitely not back then. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew, or Levi, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. By the way, I didn't say this earlier, but that was the phrase that the rabbis would say to the Talmids, or the students that passed the application process. Follow me. Follow me. And so he goes up to Matthew, this tax collector, and says, follow me. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. So not just Matthew alone, but many. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. So here's Jesus lounging with tax collectors and sinners. And the question is, why would Jesus do that? Why would he call a tax collector to follow him? Why would he go into the house of sinners and tax collectors? And he says, because he had come not for the healthy, but for the sick. Not for the righteous, but the unrighteous. So again, the idea here is that everyone is welcome. Anyone is welcome. So here's the other point. That no qualifications means no excuses. No qualifications means no excuses. So when Jesus invites anyone to follow him, he doesn't just break down barriers and chains. He also gets rid of the excuses that different people have when they hide from him. And so now the tradesman can say, there's no excuse for me any longer. Now the dropout can say, that anyone means me. Now the woman caught in adultery can say, now anyone means me. Those that have been disqualified can say, anyone means me. Those that were counted out, anyone means me. And I know some of you came in this morning and said, I've been disqualified. I hope that what I'm saying to you, what you're seeing today, the Holy Spirit's whispering to you is that anyone means you too. It means you too. I think about the list of people. I started kind of going through this a little bit. Listen to this, of people who thought, well, maybe they thought they were too far gone, but anyone meant them. Abraham was old. I have people say that to me all the time. Elijah was suicidal. Joseph was abused. Job was bankrupt. Moses had a speech problem. Gideon was full of fear. Samson was a womanizer. Rahab was a prostitute. The Samaritan woman was divorced 5 times. Noah was a drunk. Jacob was a cheater. David was a murderer and an adulterer. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Martha was a worrier. Zacchaeus was money hungry. Disciples were a mixed bag of fishermen, tax collectors, and politicians. And Paul was a Christian killer. So what's your excuse? What's your excuse this morning? Because if there's no qualifications, that means there's no excuses. And anyone means anyone. And the call of Jesus is to anyone. But here's the part I want you to understand as we close. It's anyone, but it's everything. It's anyone, but it's everything. So when Jesus makes this invitation, he welcomes anyone. He says anyone could come after him, anyone who wishes to follow him. But we can't stop there, because then he goes into this idea of denying yourself, taking up your cross, and following him. In other words, when you choose to follow Jesus, you're choosing to follow him wherever he takes you. Wherever he takes you. Again, the Talmites would follow the rabbi so closely. You know, if they said, let's go over here and do this, let's go over here and teach there, literally they would follow the rabbi anywhere they went, because they wanted to know what the rabbi knew, and they wanted to do what the rabbi was doing. And so if the rabbi went to the market, guess who was following right behind? If the rabbi went down this long dusty road over there to teach, guess who was following right behind? The Talmites. They followed right behind the rabbi the entire time, followed closely, so closely that the dust would get on them. We follow a rabbi who didn't flee persecution. So if our rabbi walked through persecution, he's going to call us to pick up our cross, deny ourselves, and follow him into those same things. We have a rabbi who gave his life. Are you willing to follow that closely? Anyone is welcome. There are no qualifications. There are no excuses. But the cost is great. And I guess the question I would ask you is, are you ready to be covered in the dust of the rabbi Jesus? Like, are you willing to follow him so closely that no matter where he takes you, no matter where you go, no matter where he leads, that you'd be willing to go there. Well, as the worship team comes, there's two things I want us to think about as we close, two things to reflect on. Number one, if you walked in feeling disqualified today, in a society where everything is, we qualify for everything. If you walked in today feeling disqualified, I hope that you know that when Jesus says anyone, he means you. He means you. The other part that I want us to talk about or think about is following closely. Are we willing to follow Jesus so closely? And that's the kind of idea that we're talking about in this series, Not a Fan. Are we a fan of his, where we're just kind of hanging out in the background, or are we a follower? Are we following him so closely that he says, you know what, we need to stop here and talk about this together. And you say, no, I'm not going to follow you there. I'd rather stay back here. Follow me. Let's go here and let's have this conversation. No, thank you, Jesus. I'll step back now. Come on, follow me. Let's go have a conversation with this person that needs a relationship with me. Are you willing to speak it? Let's go do it together. No, I'm going to take a step back now. Jesus says, hey, let's look at your bank account for a minute and let's kind of open up your checkbook and see how you're doing with that. No, we're not going to have that talk, Jesus. I'm not. You see, this is what followers do. Fans back off and they say, no, I'm not going to follow like that. I'm not going to do that. Would you sacrifice this? Jesus says, follow me. And you start to follow and he says, would you be willing to sacrifice this? And you back off again and say, no, I'm not. Will you be covered by the dust of your rabbi? Will you follow him so closely that wherever he says go, you go? Whatever he says, let's talk about, you talk about. When he says, say this, you say it. When he says, open up your account, your checkbook, and give, you do it. Like whatever he calls you to do, you do. Or are there places in your life where you haven't allowed Jesus to be a part of? You've said, I'm stepping back here. I'm stepping back here. I'm not going to follow you that close. Like you can turn around and kick some dust at me, and it might reach me somewhere over there. Or are you following so close that no matter what he says, no matter what he asks us to do, we're willing to do? That's what followers do. That's what followers do. Not fans, but followers. Are you willing to do that? Follow that closely. Let's pray. God, thank you for your love for us. Thank you that we have a rabbi, a teacher, a savior who loved us, who sacrificed his life for us, who went all in, who gave everything. And God, you've called us as your students, as your disciples, as your talmids. You've called us to follow that closely, that we'd be willing to give everything, that we'd be willing to go all in, we'd be willing to sacrifice whatever you call us to sacrifice. And God, help us to really begin to reflect now on our lives. And are there places in our lives that are off limits? Places where you've said come this way and we've gone another way. And Jesus says, I didn't lead you into that temptation. I didn't lead you into that sin. Follow me. Stay close to me and follow me. And as we reflect on our life, God, just bring to light anywhere in our life that we've gone our own way. We've not followed well. We've been more like a fan than a follower. And we give those things to you this morning. We want to follow you. And God, we love you. We thank you that your call to anyone means anyone. God, I thank you for calling me, a man that oftentimes feels disqualified even to stand up here before these people. And yet you've called. God, I lift those in this room that walked through this door today and thought the walls were going to crumble around them. I thank you that they did it. I thank you that they came. And I pray, God, that you've spoken to them and said to them, I want you. I want you. I want you. I want you. Follow me. Follow me. God, we thank you. You are an incredible, gracious, loving, kind God. We follow you today. In Jesus' name, amen.